My MIL said you deserved this. That was what my daughter whispered. Not shouted, not argued, just whispered. Thin, tired words that slipped through the half-closed door like smoke. I was lying on the couch in the dim living room, the afternoon light pressing weakly through the curtains, my body heavy and uncooperative, when those words found me. I remember thinking, in that strange fog between pain and sleep, deserved what? I tried to sit up, but my chest felt tight, as if someone had placed a warm, damp blanket over me and forgotten to lift it off. The room smelled faintly of ginger tea and the antiseptic wipes the nurse had used that morning. Somewhere the clock ticked, slow, deliberate, almost judgmental. My daughter didn't know I was awake. Her voice trembled as she spoke again, quieter this time, as if the walls themselves might betray her. She said Mom brought this on herself, that she was always too involved, too much. There was a pause, then a man's voice, low, impatient, her husband. I couldn't hear all of it, just enough to know he wasn't comforting her. He never really did. "Well," he muttered, "you know how my mother is." That was when something inside me cracked, not loudly, not all at once, but in a slow, aching way that felt permanent. I closed my eyes and let the ceiling blur. In that moment, flat on my back and barely strong enough to lift a glass of water, I realized this wasn't just about my illness. This wasn't about exhaustion or age or bad luck. This was about punishment. For years, no, decades, I had been the one who smoothed things over, who gave more than I had, who stayed quiet when it would have been easier to scream. I had worn kindness like a second skin, believing, foolishly, that love returned itself if you gave it enough time. I didn't know yet how deep the betrayal went. I didn't know that my own brother, my blood, my childhood ally, would soon look me in the eye and tell me I was being dramatic. But that whisper was the beginning of the end of who I used to be. Before my body betrayed me, before the doctors and medications and long sleepless nights, my life was simple in the way that only quiet sacrifices can be. I raised my daughter mostly on her own. Her father left when she was 10, left behind a note on the kitchen table in a house that suddenly felt too big and too empty. I worked 2 jobs back then, one in the mornings at a small accounting office, another in the evenings at a grocery store where my feet ached and my smile came from habit, not joy. Still, I made sure dinner was warm. Still, I helped with homework. Still, I sat on the edge of her bed at night and listened to her worries as if they were the most important things in the world, because to her, they were. She grew up gentle, a little too eager to please, the kind of child who said sorry even when she hadn't done anything wrong. Maybe that was my fault. When she met her husband, I tried to be happy. He was polite enough, educated, well-spoken. His family, though, especially his mother, made the air feel tighter whenever they entered a room. Her name was the kind people associate with authority, sharp consonants, a firm handshake, the sort of woman who smiled without warmth and asked questions that weren't really questions at all. "So," she'd say, looking around my modest home, "this is where you raised her?" I laughed it off at first, told myself I was being sensitive, told myself not everyone expressed kindness the same way. When they married, I helped pay for the wedding. Not all of it, just enough to ease the burden. I bought my daughter's dress when her future mother-in-law insisted on something more refined than what my daughter had chosen. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself love meant compromise. After the wedding, my daughter changed slowly, not in a way that could be pointed to or argued with, just little things. Fewer phone calls, shorter visits. She stopped asking my opinion and started repeating phrases that didn't sound like her. "Maybe you worry too much, Mom. You don't have to be involved in everything. We're trying to set boundaries." Boundaries. That word became a wall I kept walking into. Then my health began to fail. It started with fatigue I couldn't explain, the kind that didn't go away with sleep, then dizziness, then pain, dull at first, then sharper, more insistent. Doctor visits blurred together, white rooms, serious faces, words like chronic and inflammation and rest. Rest is a luxury when you spent your life earning love by being useful. My daughter came to stay with me after one particularly frightening episode when I fainted in the kitchen. I remember waking up on the cold tile, the ceiling fan spinning above me, and thinking, I don't want to die like this. She hovered that first week, cooked, cleaned, helped me bathe when my hands shook too badly. I saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the dark circles, the way she jumped when her phone buzzed. That was when I first sensed something was wrong. Not with her marriage exactly, but with the way she spoke about it, carefully, like someone choosing words in a room full of listening ears. Still, I said nothing. I had always believed silence was safer. I didn't yet know that my silence had been misinterpreted, not as strength, but as guilt. And I didn't yet know that while I lay there trying to heal, conversations were happening about me, without me. Conversations that would change everything. By the second week of my daughter staying with me, I learned the sound of her exhaustion, the way a mother learns the cry of her newborn. It wasn't just in her sighs or the way her shoulders slumped when she thought I wasn't looking. It was in how carefully she folded towels, as if neatness might keep something else from unraveling. It was in the way she flinched every time her phone lit up on the kitchen counter, even when it was only a notification from the weather app or a spam call. I watched her from the couch most mornings, pretending to nap while she moved quietly around the house. She brewed coffee she barely drank, toast she forgot to butter. Sometimes she'd stand at the sink, staring out the window, lost in thought, her reflection looking older than it should have. I wanted to ask her what was wrong, but mothers like me, mothers who built themselves around their children, develop a terrible habit of swallowing questions if we think they might burden the ones we love. So instead, I said things like, "You don't have to do that, sweetheart. I can manage." And she'd smile too quickly. "I know, Mom, just rest." Rest. The word followed me everywhere. Doctors said it, nurses said it. My brother said it when he came by one afternoon with a bag of oranges and the kind of concern that never quite reached his eyes. "You've always pushed yourself too hard," he told me, settling into the armchair like he owned it. "This is your body telling you to slow down." My brother, David, was younger than me by 3 years, but he had always acted older, more confident, more decisive, more certain he knew best. Growing up, he was the one teachers praised and neighbors admired. I was the quiet one, the helper, the one who stayed behind to clean up after gatherings while he was already halfway down the street. When he spoke, people listened. That day, he glanced at my daughter bustling around the kitchen and lowered his voice. "She shouldn't be doing all this. She's married now. She has her own responsibilities." I felt a small sting at that. "She offered," I said softly. David waved a hand. "I'm just saying, you've always leaned on her emotionally, maybe without realizing it." I stared at him, unsure I'd heard correctly. Leaned on her? I wanted to list every sacrifice I'd made, every hour worked, every dream postponed. I wanted to remind him who sat at my bedside after our mother died while he flew in for the funeral and flew right back out. But the words tangled in my chest, heavy and useless. "I never meant to—" I began. He interrupted gently, the way people do when they think they're being kind. "I know, you mean well, but intentions don't always matter." That was the first time I felt something shift, not sharply, but enough to notice, like a picture frame knocked slightly crooked on the wall. After he left, my daughter avoided my eyes. That night, while she slept in the guest room, I lay awake listening to the house settle. The pipes knocked softly, the refrigerator hummed. Pain pulsed in my joints, steady as a drumbeat. I wondered when needing help had become a character flaw. A few days later, my daughter's mother-in-law came to visit. She didn't call first. I heard her heels before I saw her, the crisp, confident sound of someone who expected doors to open for her. My daughter stiffened when the doorbell rang, her shoulders rising almost imperceptibly. "I'll get it," she said quickly, already moving. From the couch, I watched the exchange unfold in the hallway. Polite smiles, a quick hug that barely touched skin. My daughter stepping aside, making space, as she always did. Her mother-in-law entered my living room like an inspector, eyes scanning the furniture, the clutter of pill bottles on the side table, the blanket draped over my legs. "Well," she said, clasping her hands together, "you do look tired." I forced a smile. "I suppose that's one way to put it." She sat without being invited, crossed her legs, looked at my daughter. "You didn't tell me it was this bad." My daughter flushed. "Mom's recovering." "From what exactly?" she asked, her tone sharp with curiosity, not concern. I explained as briefly as I could. Chronic illness, treatment, monitoring, fatigue. She nodded slowly, lips pursed. "You know," she said, "stress can do terrible things to the body." Something about the way she said it made my skin prickle. "I imagine so," I replied. She leaned forward, "And stress often comes from not knowing when to let go." The room fell quiet. My daughter stared at the floor. "I've always believed," her mother-in-law continued, "that children need space to build their own lives. Constant involvement can create dependency." I felt heat rise in my face. "I don't believe loving your child is the same as controlling them." She smiled then, not kindly. "Sometimes the line isn't as clear as we'd like." I opened my mouth to respond, but my daughter spoke first. "Maybe we shouldn't talk about this right now," she said softly. Her mother-in-law stood, smoothing her jacket. "Of course, I just worry for both of you." When she left, the house felt colder. My daughter apologized, immediately, too quickly. "I'm sorry, Mom. She didn't mean, she just—" "It's all right," I said, though my chest ached. "You don't have to explain." But later that evening, I overheard them on the phone. My daughter in the kitchen, voice low, strained. I know you think she brings it on herself. I'm just tired." And that's when the whisper came. "My MIL said you deserved this." And something in me finally understood. In the days that followed, pieces began to fall into place with a painful clarity. My daughter grew quieter. She second-guessed herself constantly, asked permission before helping me, as if afraid of doing the wrong thing. When I thanked her, she looked almost guilty. One afternoon, she sat beside me on the couch, twisting a tissue in her hands. "Mom," she hesitated, do you think you might be a little too attached?" The word landed like a slap. I took a breath. "Attached how?" She shrugged, eyes shining. "I don't know, maybe emotionally, that's what they say." "They?" I reached for her hand. She let me take it, but her fingers were stiff, uncertain. "Sweetheart," I said gently, "who is they?" She swallowed. "My husband, her mother-in-law, even Uncle David thinks maybe you rely on me too much." The room seemed to tilt. "David said that?" She nodded. "He said you've always been sensitive, that you personalize things." Personalize? As if my pain were a hobby inconveniencing the audience. I felt something close over me inside then. Not anger exactly, but a deep settling sadness, the kind that comes when you realize you've been speaking a language no one around you wants to understand. "I'm sorry," my daughter whispered. "I didn't mean to hurt you." I smiled for her sake. "I know."
But that night, alone with my thoughts, I asked myself a question I'd avoided for years. When did my kindness become a liability? The next time my brother came over, I decided to speak. Not to accuse, just to understand. He arrived with the same confident stride, the same air of reasonableness, sat down, looked at me expectantly. "David," I said, choosing my words carefully, "why do you think I lean on my daughter too much?" He sighed as if weary of explaining something obvious. "It's not about blame, it's about patterns." "What pattern?" I asked. "You've always needed reassurance. You call her a lot. You share your worries. That can be heavy for a young woman with a marriage to manage." "I was sick," I said quietly, "and I'm sorry about that, but illness doesn't erase habits." There it was. No concern for how his words might land, no curiosity about my experience, just conclusions. "She's my daughter. Talking to her isn't a habit, it's a relationship." He shook his head. "This is what I mean. You take everything so personally." I looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw something I hadn't wanted to see before. He wasn't misunderstanding me. He was choosing the side that made him more comfortable. It was easier to align with my daughter's in-laws, easier to call me sensitive than to question the quiet authority of a woman who never doubted herself. "Maybe," I said slowly, "the problem isn't that I feel too much. Maybe it's that everyone else feels too little." He frowned. "You're being dramatic." That word again, dramatic, as if my life were a performance inconveniencing the audience. After he left, I sat in silence for a long time. The clock ticked, the pain pulsed, and for the first time I didn't try to push it away. I let myself feel the full weight of it, not just the illness, but the betrayal. My brother had sided with my abusers. My daughter was being shaped by voices that told love was weakness. And I had been blamed, not for wrongdoing, but for caring too deep.
Stepping back sounds simple when you say it out loud. In reality, it feels like learning how to breathe with one lung. The morning after I decided to stop explaining myself, I woke before dawn. The house was still, wrapped in that bluish-gray quiet that comes just before morning commits to existing. My joints ached in a way that felt almost conversational, like my body was reminding me it hadn't forgiven me yet. I lay there listening to my own breathing, shallow and careful, and tried to imagine what less looked like. Less talking, less reaching, less fixing. For most of my life, love had been an action verb. I cooked, I cleaned, I listened. I anticipated needs before they were voiced. I apologized even when I didn't understand the offense. If someone around me was uncomfortable, I treated it like a personal failure. Now I was supposed to stop. When my daughter came into the kitchen later that morning, she found me sitting at the table instead of bustling around like I usually did, a mug of tea untouched in front of me. "You should still be in bed," she said automatically. "I wanted to sit," I replied. She hesitated, as if unsure what the correct response was. Then she busied herself with the kettle, her movements sharp, slightly irritated. I watched her carefully, noticing things I might have overlooked before, the way she sighed under her breath when she reached for a clean cup, the way she checked her phone twice in under a minute. "You didn't sleep well," I said. She shrugged. "It's fine." I didn't push. That was new. The silence stretched, thick but not hostile, just unfamiliar. Finally, she spoke. "My husband thinks I should go home this weekend." I nodded. "If that's what you want." She glanced at me quickly, searching my face. "You don't mind?" The old me would have rushed to reassure her, told her of course not, that she should never worry about me, that I'd be fine, always fine. Instead, I said, "I'll manage." It wasn't punishment, it wasn't manipulation, it was the truth. She turned back to the counter, shoulders tight. "Okay." I could feel her confusion like static in the air. My quiet was unsettling her. Perhaps she mistook it for resentment. Perhaps she was used to my emotional availability being constant, unconditional, unquestioned. I realized then that stepping back wasn't just an act of self-preservation, it was a disruption. That weekend when she left, the house felt cavernous. Not lonely exactly, but exposed. I spent the first day doing very little, resting the way doctors had instructed, but I'd never fully obeyed. I noticed how hard it was not to narrate my thoughts out loud, not to pick up the phone and share every twinge, every worry. By the second day, I began to see patterns I hadn't allowed myself to see before. How often I'd been the one to call first. How often conversations revolved around smoothing over someone else's discomfort. How rarely anyone asked what I needed without also explaining why it might be inconvenient. That realization hurt more than I expected. On Sunday evening, my brother called. I almost didn't answer, but some habits die slowly. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "About the same," I said. "I talked to your daughter. She's worried about you." I closed my eyes. "Worried how?" "She feels guilty," he said, "like she's responsible for your health." I took a breath. "I've never said that." He nodded. "I know, but sometimes the pressure isn't spoken." There it was again, the accusation dressed as concern. "David," I said quietly, "why does everyone assume I'm manipulating without intention?" He paused. "Because you don't realize how intense you can be." Intensity, another word that made kindness sound dangerous. "I'm sick. I'm scared. I talk to my daughter because she's my family." "And she has her own family now," he countered. "So do I, or at least I thought I did." The line went quiet. "That's not fair," he said finally. I almost laughed. "Neither is being told I deserve to be ill." His breath caught. "Who said that?" "My daughter overheard her mother-in-law, and then she told me." Another pause, longer this time. "Well," he said slowly, "you know how people talk when they're frustrated." I felt something go cold inside me. "She said I deserved this," I repeated, "and instead of questioning that, you're explaining it." "I'm just saying—" "No," I interrupted, my voice steady but firm. "You're choosing to excuse her." Silence again. When he spoke, his tone shifted, defensive now. "You're making this into something it doesn't have to be." I looked out the window at the darkening sky. "I'm not making it into anything. I'm just not carrying it anymore." We hung up shortly after. No resolution, no apology, just distance. I expected to feel devastated. Instead, I felt lighter. The following week, my daughter returned briefly to pick up some things she'd left behind. She moved through the house like a guest, careful not to linger. When she handed me a folded sweater, her hands shook slightly. "You didn't call," she said. "I didn't want to disturb you." "You always call." "I know." She studied my face. "Are you upset with me?" The question was fragile, earnest. "No," I said truthfully. "I'm tired." She sat down across from me, twisting her wedding ring. "My husband thinks maybe it's better if I don't stay as long when I visit." "I understand." She looked up sharply. "You do?" "Yes." That seemed to unsettle her more than anger would have. "She says you put ideas in my head," she continued quietly. "That I make me doubt my marriage." I swallowed. "Do you feel like I've done that?" She hesitated. "I don't know. I just know I feel torn all the time." I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers, gently, without urgency. "I don't want to be something you feel torn about. I want to be a place you feel safe." Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm so tired, Mom," she whispered. "I know. I see it." And in that moment, I understood something that hurt but also freed me. My daughter wasn't my enemy. She was my mirror.
She was living the life I'd modeled, pleasing, accommodating, shrinking to fit the space allowed. And just like me, she was being punished for it. As weeks passed, my withdrawal became noticeable. I stopped offering unsolicited, stopped explaining myself, stopped apologizing for taking up space. When family gatherings came around, I declined politely, citing health, rest, other plans. My brother mentioned, through my daughter, that people were concerned. Concerned was another word that often meant uncomfortable with change. I heard that my daughter's mother-in-law had remarked that I seemed distant. That made me smile just a little. Distance, I learned, can be protective. Without my constant presence, conversations shifted, tensions surfaced that had once been redirected towards me. My daughter began calling, not daily, not urgently, but honestly. "I didn't realize how much she criticized you," she admitted one evening. "I thought it was normal." "It wasn't," I said gently. "She says you try to control me." I paused. "Do you feel like I've controlled you?" She was quiet for a long time. "No," she said finally. "I feel understood." That was enough. One afternoon, my brother showed up unannounced. He looked uncomfortable standing in my doorway, as if the ground beneath him had shifted. "You've been pulling away," he said. "I've been resting," I replied. He sighed. "Everyone's talking." I met his gaze. "About me?" "About the situation," he corrected. "Which situation? My illness, or the fact that I stopped making things easier for everyone else?" His jaw tightened. "You're being unfair." I smiled sadly. "David, when I was sick, did anyone ask how it felt to be told I deserved it?" He didn't answer. "When my feelings were dismissed, did anyone correct that?" Still silence. I nodded. "That's what I thought." "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said finally. "I know, but you did." He shifted his weight. "So what now?" I considered the question. "Now," I said, "I take care of myself, and you decide whether you want to know me as I am, not as I was convenient." He hung up shortly after. No resolution, no apology, just distance. I expected to feel devastated. Instead, I felt lighter. For the first time in my life, I didn't chase anyone. And though my body was still healing, something deeper had begun to mend. There's a moment in every quiet conflict when the truth stops whispering and starts demanding to be heard. For me, it came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the sky hangs low and the air smells like damp earth and old leaves. My joints throbbed more than usual, and the house felt heavy with unfinished conversations. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through a small stack of mail, when my phone buzzed. It was my daughter. I let it ring twice before answering, not out of spite, out of steadiness. I'd learned not to rush toward every emotional summons. "Mom," she said, her voice tight, "can you talk?" "Yes," I replied. "I'm here." There was a pause, then a shaky breath. "I did something today." I waited. "I read some messages," she said, "between my husband and his mother." The air seemed to still. "And?" I asked softly. "And she's been telling him things about you," my daughter continued, "things I didn't know, that you're manipulative, that you fake illness for attention, that you've always tried to keep me dependent." Each word landed with a dull thud. None of it surprised me anymore, but hearing it confirmed still hurt in a way that was physical. "I'm so sorry," my daughter said quickly. "I didn't believe her, at least not fully, but I didn't stop it either." "That must have been hard to read," I said. She sniffed. "Why would she say those things?" I looked out the window, watching rain slide down the glass. Some people need a villain to feel justified. She told him you were the reason I'm unhappy, my daughter whispered, that if I set firmer boundaries with you, everything would be better. And do you feel happier when you pull away from me? I asked. Silence. No, she said. I feel smaller. That word echoed. Smaller. I don't know what to do, she said. If I confront her, she'll say I'm being influenced by you. If I don't, I feel like I'm betraying myself. I closed my eyes, memories flooding back, years of swallowing discomfort, of choosing peace over truth, of telling myself it wasn't worth the fight. I won't tell you what to do, I said gently. That's important. Whatever you decide has to be yours. She exhaled, sounding relieved and sad all at once. That's not what she says. I know. She says a good mother would step back completely for my sake. I felt the old reflex rise, the urge to defend myself, to explain my love, to prove my innocence. I let it pass. A good mother, I said slowly, wants her child to live honestly, even if that honesty leads away from her. My daughter cried then, not loudly, just soft, broken sobs. I don't want to lose you, she said. You won't, but you might have to stop letting other people decide what our relationship means. That conversation shifted something fundamental, not dramatically, not overnight, but like a hairline crack finally letting light through. A few days later, my daughter came over unannounced. She looked thinner, her face drawn with fatigue, but her eyes held something new, resolve, fragile but real. I spoke to her, she said as soon as she sat down. I poured her tea, hands steady. How did it go? She denied everything, my daughter said bitterly, said I was twisting her words, said I was turning me against her. I nodded. That's often how it goes. She cried, said she was only trying to protect her son, that she worries I'm too easily influenced. I met her gaze. And what did you say? I said I'm an adult, my daughter replied quietly, that I can love my mother without being controlled by her. My chest tightened. She didn't like that, she added. I imagine not. My daughter laughed weakly. My husband says I should apologize to keep the peace. There it was, the phrase that had silenced me for decades. I'm so tired of keeping peace that only exists if I stay quiet, my daughter said, surprising both of us. I reached for her hand. Peace that requires your silence isn't peace. She nodded slowly, as if committing the words to memory. That evening, my brother called again. This time, I answered without hesitation. I heard things are escalating, he said. Things have been uncomfortable for a while. They're just visible now. He cleared his throat. You could make this easier. I waited. If you reassured her mother-in-law, if you apologized for overstepping. Overstepping what? I asked calmly. For being too involved, he said, for making your daughter feel torn. I closed my eyes. David, do you really believe I deserve to be blamed for someone else's cruelty? He hesitated. I think everyone has a part. I let out a slow breath. My part was loving my daughter. If that's a crime, I won't apologize for it. You're being stubborn, he replied. No, I replied. I'm being clear. He grew frustrated. You're tearing the family apart. I felt a familiar ache, but this time it didn't paralyze me. The family wasn't held together, I said quietly. It was held quiet. There's a difference. Silence stretched between us. You've changed, he said finally. Yes, I agreed. I had to. The confrontation I'd avoided for months arrived unexpectedly. My daughter's husband came to see me alone. He stood in my living room, hands shoved into his pockets, eyes scanning the floor as if looking for escape routes. "She's upset," he said. "So am I replied. He frowned. "This doesn't have to be a fight." "It already is," I said gently. "It just hasn't been honest." He shifted uncomfortably. "Your mother thinks you don't respect boundaries." I met his gaze. "Your mother thinks many things about me. Have you ever asked why?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. "She says you influence my wife." "Influence her how?" I asked. "By making her doubt us." I leaned back slightly. "If your marriage can't withstand questions, that's not my doing." His jaw tightened. "You're saying this is our fault?" "I'm saying," I replied, "that blaming me is easier than listening to her." He looked startled. "She feels torn," I continued, "exhausted, small. If you love her, you should be concerned about that, not about whether I'm too present." He was quiet for a long moment. "My mother only wants what's best," he said weakly. "Then why does what's best require tearing someone else down?" I asked. He didn't answer. When he left, I felt no triumphs, only a strange, solemn calm. The truth began to ripple outward after that, not because I shouted it, but because I stopped absorbing the blame. Without me as the convenient problem, tensions in my daughter's marriage became harder to ignore. Her mother-in-law's criticisms grew sharper, less disguised. My brother's certainty wavered when his suggestions failed to restore the old comfort. And my daughter, my tired, brave daughter, started to see the pattern. One night she called me late. "I don't think she ever wanted peace," she said quietly. "I think she wanted control." I closed my eyes. "That realization hurts." "Yes," she said, "but it also makes me feel less crazy." We sat in that shared understanding for a while, the distance between us softened by truth. I didn't gloat. I didn't say I told you so. I didn't need to, because something far more powerful was happening. The truth was standing on its own, and for the first time, I wasn't in its way.
There is a peculiar loneliness that comes with being vindicated quietly. No one apologizes loudly. No one announces they were wrong. The truth doesn't arrive with an audience or a parade. It simply settles in the room, undeniable, and waits to see who will acknowledge it. By then, I had learned not to wait. My health had improved slightly, not enough to call it recovery, but enough that I could feel the difference between pain and panic. I could stand a little longer in the kitchen, walk to the mailbox without resting halfway back. These small victories felt private, almost sacred. They were mine. My daughter started calling again, not out of obligation, but necessity. "Can I come over?" she asked one afternoon. "Just to sit?" "Yes," I said. "You don't have to explain." When she arrived, she didn't bring groceries or cleaning supplies or that frantic sense of duty she used to carry. She brought herself. Curled up on the couch beside me, shoes kicked off, eyes rimmed red. "She told everyone I'm disrespectful," she said flatly, "that I've changed." I nodded. "You have." "She says it like it's a bad thing." I smiled faintly. "It usually sounds that way to people who benefited from who you were before." My daughter leaned her head against the back of the couch. "I didn't realize how much I've been apologizing for existing." I thought of my own life, of all the times I'd softened my voice, dimmed my needs, adjusted my posture to make others comfortable. "It's a hard habit to break," I said, "but you've noticed it. That matters." She was quiet for a long time. "My husband wants me to make things right," she said eventually. "And what does right look like to him?" I asked. "That I apologize, that I reassure her mother, that I promise not to talk to you about our problems anymore." The words hung between us.
"I won't tell you what to do," I said, keeping my voice steady, "but I will tell you this. Anyone who asks you to cut off your support system is not asking for peace. They're asking for control." She swallowed hard. "I think I've known that. I just didn't want to admit it." "That's understandable," I said gently. "Admitting it changes things." My brother, meanwhile, began to feel the consequences of his neutrality. Family gatherings grew tense. Without me smoothing edges, conversations faltered. People noticed the absence, not of my presence, but of my labor. He called me one evening, his tone uncertain. "I didn't realize how bad it was," he said. I didn't respond immediately. "I mean," he continued, "I didn't think her mother-in-law was that harsh." I closed my eyes. "You heard what you wanted to hear." "That's not fair," he protested. "Neither was calling me dramatic while I was sick." Silence. "I thought I was helping," he said finally. "I know, but help that ignores harm isn't help." He sighed. "She's causing problems for everyone now." I smiled sadly. Truth tends to do that. The turning point came unexpectedly. My daughter arrived one morning with a small suitcase. "I need a few days," she said, voice trembling but determined. I stood there unsure what to do with the rush of emotion. "You're always welcome," I said. She set the suitcase down and exhaled as if she'd been holding her breath for years. "She told me I was ungrateful," my daughter said, "that marrying into their family was a privilege, that you filled my head with nonsense." I reached for her hand. "And what did you say?" She said, "I'm done being spoken to like that I love my mother, that I won't apologize for it." My heart ached with pride and fear. "My husband says I'm choosing you over him," she added. I met her eyes. "This isn't about choosing me." "I know. It's about choosing myself." We sat together, the suitcase by the door, the air thick with consequence. That night she cried in her old room. I didn't go in right away. I gave her space, something I'd never been good at before. When I did knock, it was gentle. "Do you want company?" I asked. She nodded. We sat on the bed like we used to when she was younger. No advice, no fixing, just presence. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know, but I don't feel crazy anymore," she added. I smiled through tears. That's how freedom usually begins. The fallout was not cinematic. There were no shouting matches, no dramatic ultimatums. There were tense phone calls, cold silences, carefully worded messages that said nothing and everything at once. My brother tried to mediate. "If you both just apologize," he said, exasperated, "this could blow over." "Apologize for what?" my daughter asked. "For hurting feelings," he replied. "Whose?" she asked. He didn't answer. That was the moment he understood something had shifted beyond his control. As days turned to weeks, my daughter began to see her marriage with new eyes, not as a failure, but as a reflection. She noticed how often her opinions were dismissed, how quickly her needs were reframed as inconveniences, how easily love became conditional. "She says I'm too sensitive," my daughter told me one evening, "just like she says about you." I nodded. Sensitive is often code for not easily controlled. She laughed softly. I never noticed how familiar that sounded. My health continued its slow improvement, but the real healing happened elsewhere. In the quiet mornings when my daughter made her own coffee and didn't ask if it was okay, in the evenings when we talked without censoring ourselves, in the moments I resisted the urge to rescue her from discomfort. I had to unlearn the belief that love meant sacrifice without limit. I had to accept that stepping back didn't make me cold, it made me honest. One afternoon, my brother came over unannounced again. He looked tired, older. I don't know how to fix this, he admitted. I gestured for him to sit. You don't have to fix it. He frowned. Then what am I supposed to do? Listen, I said, without defending, without minimizing. He sat quietly. I was wrong, he said slowly, to dismiss you, to side with people who didn't know you. I felt the weight of those words, not triumphant, but grounding. Thank you, I said. That matters. He nodded. I just didn't want conflict. Neither did I, but avoiding conflict created something worse. He left soon after, thoughtful, subdued. Not redeemed, but changed. The hardest part wasn't losing people, it was letting go of who I'd been to keep them. I was still kind, still loving, but no longer silent, no longer willing to absorb pain so others could remain comfortable. My daughter watched this transformation with equal parts gratitude and grief. I wished I'd seen it sooner, she said once. So did I, but seeing it now is enough. And it was, because without revenge, without spectacle, something powerful had happened. The blame had nowhere left to land, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe. By the time the truth reached everyone, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like an aftermath. The kind that leaves things rearranged, not destroyed, but undeniably different. My daughter stayed with me longer than she'd planned. At first, she told herself it was temporary, a pause to clear her head. But as days turned into weeks, the pause became a mirror she couldn't look away from. She noticed how quiet the house was. Not the tense quiet she was used to, the kind that meant someone was upset but pretending not to be. This was a gentler quiet, a breathing quiet, the sound of space where thoughts could stretch out without being corrected. I didn't realize how loud my life was, she said one morning, standing by the window. I knew what she meant. When you live inside constant judgment, even silence feels suspicious at first. Her husband called daily at first, then less often. His messages shifted from concern to frustration, from frustration to accusation. You're embarrassing me. You're letting your mother control you. Everyone thinks you're overreacting. Each message pulled at her like a tide. I watched her read them, her face tightening, her shoulders drawing inward. Old instincts rose in me, the urge to intervene, to call him, to defend her. I resisted. This was her boundary to build. One evening, she handed me her phone. "She want you to read this," she said. I shook my head. "I don't need to." She insisted. "I want you to see what I've been hearing." I read slowly, carefully, not for ammunition, for understanding. By the time I handed the phone back, my heart felt heavy, but not angry. "This isn't how someone speaks to a partner," I said quietly. She nodded. "I know." Word traveled fast in families like ours. By the time a small gathering was planned for a cousin's birthday, everyone knew there was tension. I debated whether to go. My brother encouraged me. "It might help," he said. "People need to see you." I went, not to defend myself, but to exist. The room buzzed with conversation when I arrived. Laughter faltered for a fraction of a second. Eyes flicked toward me, then away. My daughter arrived shortly after, alone. That was when the atmosphere truly shifted. Her mother-in-law wasn't there, but her influence was. I felt it in the way relatives approached us carefully, choosing words like stepping stones across a river. "You're looking better," someone said to me. "Thank you," I replied. "You must be relieved your daughter's helping you," another added. I smiled gently. "She's helping herself, too." That seemed to confuse them.
At one point, my brother stood up to make a toast. It was meant to be lighthearted, but his voice wavered. Family, he said, is complicated, but we're here because we care. I met his eyes. He looked away. After the toast, a distant aunt approached my daughter. You know, she said, lowering her voice, marriage requires sacrifice. My daughter smiled politely. So does silence. I've done enough of that. The woman blinked, unprepared. Later, I heard someone say, she's changed, and someone else replied, maybe she's just honest now. I said nothing. That was the public consequence. Not shame, not spectacle, but a quiet recalibration of narratives. People began to notice inconsistencies. Why my daughter looked more at ease away from her husband, why her mother-in-law's stories shifted depending on the audience, why I seemed calmer now than I had in years. Truth doesn't argue, it simply stays. The most difficult conversation came late one night. My daughter sat across from me, hands wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold. I don't think I can go back, she said. I didn't ask where. I love him, but I don't recognize myself with him anymore. I nodded. That's an important realization. She says I've been poisoned against them, that you are turning me into someone ungrateful. I looked at her carefully. Do you feel poisoned? She thought for a moment. No, I feel awake. I reached across the table. Then trust that. She swallowed. What if everyone hates me? The fear in her voice was familiar. I was afraid of that too, I admitted, for most of my life. And, she asked, and the people who left weren't loving me. They were benefiting from me. She exhaled shakily. My brother came by again a few days later. I didn't realize how much pressure she was under, he admitted. Her husband called me. I raised an eyebrow. And? He said she's being unreasonable, that she's choosing you over him. I tilted my head. What did you say? He hesitated. I asked him why loving her mother had to be framed as betrayal. I smiled softly. He didn't have an answer. That was the moment I knew something had shifted, not just for my daughter, but for him too. The family narrative had changed. No longer she's dramatic, no longer she deserves this. Now, quietly, something isn't right. The consequences for her mother-in-law were subtle but unmistakable. Her certainty went unchallenged for the first time. When she complained, people listened differently, not dismissively, but thoughtfully. When she spoke about me, the room no longer nodded automatically. When she framed herself as the victim, someone finally asked, "What did you say to her?" Accountability arrived not as punishment, but as curiosity, and curiosity is dangerous to control. My daughter eventually told her husband she needed time, real time, not a weekend, not a cooling off period, time to think without being corrected. He didn't take it well. He accused, he pleaded, he blamed. He told her she was tearing the family apart. She replied calmly, the family was already broken. I just stopped pretending. She stayed with me through it all. I didn't cheer. I didn't whisper vindication in her ear. I made soup, sat beside her, let her cry. I learned that support didn't have to be loud to be solid. As weeks passed, I noticed something else. My pain flared less when I wasn't bracing myself emotionally. My sleep deepened when I wasn't rehearsing explanations in my head. The body, it turns out, keeps score. Letting go of emotional labor freed energy I didn't know I had. I wasn't cured, but I was healing. One evening, my daughter and I sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the sky darken. I used to think kindness meant endurance, she said. So did I replied.
She smiled at me then, really smiled, not the careful one she used to wear. "I'm glad you stopped enduring," she said. "It showed me I could too." Tears filled my eyes. That was the public consequence that mattered most. Not humiliation, not apology, but change. And change, once it begins, has a way of continuing, quietly, persistently, long after the noise fades.
Healing does not arrive all at once. It comes in quiet permissions you give yourself, in habits you stop performing, in the slow, unfamiliar feeling of not bracing for impact every time the phone rings. After my daughter decided not to return home, there was a lull, a strange, suspended stretch of time where nothing exploded, but nothing resolved either. People often imagine moments like these as dramatic crossroads, but in truth, they are more like long hallways. You walk them, step by step, unsure where the door will open, but knowing you cannot turn back. My daughter began therapy, not because anyone forced her, not because she wanted to fix the marriage quickly, but because she wanted language for what she'd been living with for years. "They keep asking me how I feel," she told me one afternoon, half amused, half exhausted. "No one's ever asked that without telling me why I shouldn't feel that way." I smiled. That's a good place to start. She learned words like enmeshment, emotional minimization, conditional approval, words that didn't accuse but clarified. And with clarity came grief. Grief for the woman she thought her mother-in-law was, grief for the marriage she thought she had, grief for the version of herself that believed love had to be earned through endurance. I watched her mourn without trying to hurry her through it. That was new too. My brother kept his distance for a while, not out of anger, out of uncertainty. When he finally came back around, it was with less authority and more humility than I'd ever seen in him. "I keep replaying things," he admitted one evening as we sat across from each other. "Conversations, the way I shut you down." I stirred my tea slowly. And I don't like who I was in those moments," he said. That was all. No justification, no defense, no request for absolution, just recognition. "I spent years thinking I was the reasonable one," he continued, "but I was really just comfortable. You made people uncomfortable by needing things." I looked at him carefully. "Needing things is human." He nodded. "I know that now." That conversation didn't fix our relationship, but it softened it, and sometimes softening is enough to begin again. As for my daughter's husband, distance changed him too. Not into someone kinder, not magically into someone self-aware, but into someone revealed. When my daughter stopped apologizing, stopped explaining, stopped returning every call immediately, his patience thinned, his words sharpened, his love showed conditions it had always carried. He wanted her back, but on familiar terms. "I'll come home," she told him calmly during one of their final conversations, "if we get counseling and if your mother stops speaking about mine." He laughed, not kindly. "You're asking me to choose," he said. She took a breath. "I'm asking you to respect me." He didn't answer. That silence was her answer. She filed for separation quietly. No social media announcements, no dramatic statements, just paperwork, just truth. When people found out, reactions varied. Some said she was brave, some said she was impulsive, some said she'd regret it. She listened politely, and then she went on living. My health continued its uneven climb. Some days were good, some days humbled me. But something fundamental had shifted. I no longer measured my worth by how indispensable I was. I learned how to ask for help without apologizing for it, and how to accept no without collapsing. I learned that peace is not the absence of conflict, it's the absence of self-betrayal. My daughter noticed the change too. "You seem lighter," she said one morning. "I am," I replied. "I stopped carrying what wasn't mine." Months later, there was a small family gathering, nothing formal, just coffee and cake at my cousin's house.
Her mother-in-law was there. So was I. We hadn't spoken in a long time. When our eyes met, she smiled tightly. "I hope you're feeling better," she said. "I am," I replied. There was a pause, a subtle tension. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time, she didn't correct me, didn't comment, didn't assert control. She moved on. It wasn't reconciliation. It was something quieter, irrelevance. And that, I learned, is often the natural end of power built on intimidation. My daughter and I developed a new rhythm, one built not on obligation, but choice. Some days we talked for hours, some days we didn't speak at all. Neither felt like abandonment. She began to build a life that didn't orbit around approval. New friends, new routines, a job opportunity she once would have declined because it wasn't practical. She took it anyway. "I'm allowed to want things," she said, half astonished. "Yes," I replied, "you always were." One evening, as the sun dipped low and the house filled with amber light, she turned to me and said something I hadn't expected. "I used to think you were too much," she said quietly. I nodded. "I know." "And now?" "Now I think the world just asked you to be smaller because it didn't want to change." I felt tears gather, not from pain this time, but release. "That may be the kindest thing anyone has ever said to me," I told her. Time did what time always does. It settled things, not into neat boxes, but into truths that could be lived with. My brother became more careful with his words, more curious, less certain. My daughter grew steadier, stronger, softer with herself. And I forgave myself for staying too long, for being quiet too often, for believing love had to hurt to be real. I want to tell you this story didn't cost me anything, that choosing myself was easy. It wasn't. I lost versions of people I loved. I lost the comfort of familiarity. I lost the illusion that kindness alone keeps you safe. But I gained something far greater. I gained my voice, and in finding it, I showed my daughter how to find hers. Sometimes, late at night, I think back to that moment, the whisper that started everything. Your MIL said you deserved this. I understand now what she really meant. She didn't think I deserved illness. She thought I deserved consequences. Consequences for not disappearing, for not surrendering my place, for not making myself smaller to make others comfortable. And in that sense, she was right, because the consequence was freedom. If you're listening to this and wondering whether it's too late to step back, too late to stop explaining, too late to choose yourself, it isn't, even now, especially now. So I'll ask you the same question I had to ask myself. How much pain are you carrying just to keep other people comfortable, and what would happen if you finally set it down? If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts below. Someone else might be waiting to hear they're not alone.